Hey guys, quick question for you. What's the biggest red flag you've ever ignored in somebody? You'll understand why I asked that after you hear the first story. Anyways, we're going to go hunting for some more netherite today, as you can probably tell by the wool that I'm taking off these sheep without asking. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into the first story. It's from r/nosleep from user reasonableunit2170. If you see a man out on the ice, do not let him aboard. Everyone knows the legend of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, especially if you reside within the Great Lake region. The 729-foot, 13,632 gross ton Great Lakes bulk carrier was comparable to the Titanic. Hull number 31 was launched June 8, 1958 in River Rouge, Michigan. She would only last for a grand total of 17 years. Multiple bad omens occurred on the morning of her launch. 3 attempts of breaking a champagne bottle during the christening, a large wave that took out infrastructure below, and a heart attack resulting in a death. In hindsight, it seemed like she was cursed from the start. When she sank on November 10, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald sank with all 29 passengers. Lake Superior holds a great many secrets, just as much a tomb as it is a body of water. Cold, deep, and dark. Even so, 3 underwater explorations were made. They occurred in 1989, 1994, and 1995. During the last exploration in 1995, with the help of a varied group, the Fitzgerald's 200-pound bronze bell was recovered, as was another item, but it didn't belong to this ship. The item that I'm referring to, dear reader, is an article that was recovered from a smaller unknown ship that had sunk the same day. A journal, the contents of which I shall recount for you here. My name, although it's unimportant to this post, is Evan Guthrie. I work at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum in Whitefish Point, Michigan. Although my position here is unclear, based on the number of odd jobs I've been assigned, you could call me a researcher or analyst of sorts. Since attendance has been dwindling over the last few years, I was tasked with digitizing the more interesting portions of our historical artifacts. I and all the people here at GLSWM, hope that this should be enough to entice you to stop by. I would like to extend my heartfelt condolences to the family of Luther Blackburn, as well as the families of the rest of the crew of the SS Lily Marina. The journal that I'll be transcribing belonged to Blackburn and tells a story that even I can seldom comprehend. A tale of the fiercest winter storm and the man they found out on the ice. November 8th, 1975, Superior, Wisconsin. The air has a chill, likes of which I have never known. Even as my gloved hands grip the pen, my knuckles ache. There are many a good place to eat by the docks. The plate that is in front of me is full of bones and crumbs, barely enough left for a mouse. The room I've rented was humble and small, just the thing I needed. I haven't had a good night's sleep in months, but last night I did. Maybe it was the way the air smelled of crisp, clean water, like snow was getting ready to fall at any moment. The flakes had already accumulated in shallow piles across the ground. Superior was known for its lake effect weather. Winter came faster here than the rest of the world. I didn't mind at all. In fact, it made me excited. It had been a long time since I had squeezed myself into the lower decks of a laker. This time, I wouldn't be one of the grunts. I would be taking the role of ship medic. Being a medic was the only thing I seemed to be good at now. The Vietnam War was my shotgun style of learning, and I was quick on my feet. The Navy sent me on my merry way once I had served my time, and I was grateful. I had seen too much carnage, too many unnecessary deaths while serving. That's some shit you never want to see again, let alone talk about. Those memories will be kept for me alone. The captain, a salty man named Thurston, met me just before sundown. Apparently, things had not been so peaceful, even here in the US. Looters and pirates still roam the waters, and I had to be wary. Nothing could be as bad as having to look a child and the barrel of a gun in the eye. As long as I didn't have to kill anyone or lay witness to the use of extreme torture, I was alright with just about anything. We would be leaving at sunup, and all I had to bring was myself. It sounded like an easy enough job to me. Before I shut my eyes tonight, I will look upon the land once more, surrendering myself to the void of a lake. The SS Lily Marina would be my lady for the next few days, and I could not wait. I hope the other members of the crew and I get along. It would be unfortunate otherwise. Once I return from my journey, I'll have to stop by and see my parents. I hope they'll forgive me for not visiting them first. L.J. Blackburn. Hi, Analyst Evan here. The first entry was short and sweet, a slice into the life of a nomadic ship medic. I was even fooled by how calm and peaceful it was. Upon further research, Luther Blackburn was a decorated soldier. He was awarded the Navy Cross and the Navy Unit Commendation. How cool is that? As you continue reading, please remember that this is a one-for-one copy of the journal's pages. None of what you read is conjecture on my end, nor is it embellished. I will also warn you that some of the content may be considered horrific and should be tread lightly. Thanks again, and if you're in the area, please remember to stop by the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum. November 9th, 1975, Lake Superior. I would have never guessed my first day back on a ship would end so poorly. Such odd occurrences in such a short amount of time. I had awoken just before the sun came up, frost covering the meager window of my room. Packing up the few items I brought was a quick task, and soon I was off toward the docks. SS Lily Marina was a sight to behold, even though it was moored near the gigantic Fitzgerald. Most would have been drawn in by the sight of the larger ship, but the small beauty of the marina was more enticing to me. Captain Thurston greeted me merrily and introduced me to most of the crew. Only a handful of names stuck in my mind. Case, the ship cook, was a larger man with curly red hair. Richard, who was the captain's first mate, reeked of cigarettes and wore a blue stocking cap atop his head. A few of the other names were Wesley, Howard, Lyle, amongst the ones I couldn't remember. They seemed like a good crew, one that wouldn't have too many scuffles unless it revolved around a game of cards. I felt at home early off. The medical area of the ship was small, yet stocked with just about anything I could ever need. Unless there was an accident, I expected to be doling out meds for stomach aches. That was an easy enough job. I figured most of my time would be spent alone under the deck, most likely reading one of the books I had brought. My time being away for war kept me from a great many of my hobbies, classical literature being one of them. Peace by Gene Wolfe sat deep within my bag. I was almost comfortable when the commotion began, a ruckus of whoops and voices traveling throughout the ship. Pretty soon my name was called, and I was forced to the surface. My services were in need. Out of seemingly nowhere, the weather started to change. Brisk waves and whipping wind had turned to large flakes of snow. In almost whiteout conditions, chunks of ice started to appear within the weather, large enough that the captain had commanded for the lookout to give better instructions. We now had obstacles to dodge. It was during that time that something truly odd happened. "There's a man in the water," the lookout called from his perch. "Man down, man in the water." Most of the crew had looked around wildly, wondering who had been stupid enough to fall from the ship. We were only hauling farming supplies. There was no reason to be out on the deck in such horrid conditions. It wasn't like we were a fishing vessel, looking to bring up catches of crabs from below the choppy surface. It was not one of the crew who had fallen. They were all still squared away safely on the ship. The man in the water was strange, standing atop a large chunk of ice, still as a statue, sailing on it like a surfboard. "What are you waiting for? Let's bring them aboard," the captain's voice rang out. That was when my services were called for. Once the rescue mission commenced, the Edmund Fitzgerald disappeared into the distance. Our ship was last in the line of three. We were the only ones who had the time to stop and help. When the man was pulled from the water, the crew was in shock. He was completely naked, skin paler than the winter scene around us. His hands and feet were starting to turn black, along with the other unfortunate appendages that hung from his body. He was also taller than most men I had seen, probably coming in at damn near 7 feet tall. Jesus Christ, what was he doing out there on the ice, naked at that? I half yelled to the crew that carried him in their arms. They looked at each other and shook their heads. I was an idiot for asking them a question they weren't capable of answering. I took the lead towards the medical bay and beckoned them to follow me. The man's head lolled back as he was carried through the narrow metal pathways. In the brief glimpses I got of his face, I felt a strange sense of familiarity. It struck me as odd, the feeling. How could I have known this man? "Place him here," I said, waving my arm to the stretcher-like bed. It was covered in white crinkly paper. As the man was placed atop it, it buckled under his weight. I shouted at the men to bring me as many blankets as they could find before they ran off into the belly of the ship. Then we were alone. "Sir, can you hear me? What is your name?" I said, trying to shake their frigid shoulders. A small groan was all I got. Moving around the small room like a madman, I found any and everything that could warm the man up. Saline that had been warmed up was connected to an IV drip. Rubber hot packs were added to all of the arterial zones. In the armpits, between the legs, wrists, ankles, and neck. Once those were in place, I covered them in layer after layer of blankets. Then I sat down in my chair and prayed. There was a chance that they were already dead. There was a chance that warming them up would not do anything to save them. But you're not dead until you're warm and dead. That's what my training has taught me. I clasped my hands together and leaned forward on my knees. Watching and waiting was all I could do for now. They had to have the will to pull themselves from the edge of death. After a few hours had passed, I made sure to replace the heating elements before checking the vital signs of the patient once more. They seemed to be coming around, but were still not awake. A familiar grumble moved its way through my stomach. The smell of stew wafted its way through the closed door, causing my mouth to water. Looking over the patient one last time, I slipped out into the confusing maze of metal and made my way towards the kitchen. Case greeted me with a warm smile. His voice was calm and inviting as I entered the mess hall. In one pot, he had beef stew, in another was what looked like a huge yellow cake. I smiled as I recognized the cornbread, a delicacy of the South, one of my favorite foods of my past. Squaring my shoulders, I walked up to the kind but imposing man. "Evening, Case. Could you get me a bowl and a slice?" I asked while eyeing the food. It smelled amazing. Anything for the ship medic. If all hell breaks loose, we have to make sure you're on top of your game. Case smiled before turning around to face the stove. I heard the sounds of bowls and plates clinking together before I was presented with my food. As the boat rocked, the soup waffled back and forth within the ceramic. "Thank you, Case. I shall enjoy this meal." I took the food from him almost greedily. The stew went down fast, too fast. I thought about asking for more, but then thought of the other crew members. Not knowing if everyone else had gotten to eat, I decided against it. Making sure I cleaned my bowl and plate, I returned them to the jolly cook. He took them with a curt thank you and sent me on my way. When I returned to the medical bay, my eyes widened to their fullest point. The bed that had been filled with the man from the ice was now empty. Blankets and hot water bottles littered the floor. The IV had been ripped out. The bloody cord also laid on the ground. I winced at the thought of the man tearing it from his flesh in a frenzy. They must have awoken and become scared from the unfamiliarity. Pulling myself from the room, I wandered the halls looking for any signs of life. That was when I noticed the trail of blood. It wasn't anything major, just a few drops here or there. I had to search carefully so as not to miss anything. Eventually, I noticed that the blood trail led towards where we keep our haul. A collection of dried soybeans and corn for farm usage. The equivalent of animal feed. That was when I heard the sound of crunching. It sounded like biting down on week-old stale bread that had been baked for too long, or like rocks being slammed together. Crunch, 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 and then cough, cough, crunch. I saw that the door to the hold was ajar when it should have been closed. The trail of blood had ended at the opening, disappearing into the darkness. I felt my heartbeat quicken as I approached the cracked door. Reaching up an unsteady hand, I pushed, and the metal groaned beneath my touch. "Hello?" I whispered softly. I was scared, unsure of what sight waited for me behind the threshold. There it was again. Crunch, crunch, cough. When I finally grew the courage to peek inside, I saw something I could never unsee. The man from the ice had his back to me. His naked body, shades of white and purple, was squatting down in front of an open bag of feed. Using both hands interchangeably, he shoveled heaping handfuls of dried soybeans into his open mouth. The man tried to chew and swallow, but his bloated cheeks spared no room. He could barely even close his jaw, his mouth was so full. Then I watched as he projectile vomited whole kernels of soybean back onto the floor. I was disgusted and distraught. "Please, stop what you're doing. This is not meant to be eaten." The man stopped what he was doing and turned to face me. With eyes as wide and as sad as a child's, the man's mouth fell open. Out of his slack jaw fell tons of seeds, covered in strings of saliva. I stifled a gag and pushed forward into the room. Slowly, the man stood up from his crouch. As he reached his full height, I felt a shiver pass through my body. His tall and slender frame felt imposing. It felt like when I was a child standing in front of a scarecrow on my grandfather's farm. Something horrific and just a step shy from being human. But this man was human and he needed my help. Please come back to the medical bay with me. If you're hungry, let me fetch you some food. You're unwell and need to be treated. I pointed at the man's hands and feet. With how black they were, I was sure necrosis had already started to set in. There wasn't much I could do about the ruined product, but that wasn't really my issue. What I needed to deal with was the health of my patient. I needed to keep my oath to do no harm. Finally, the man moved towards me, and I led him out of the room. "I'm hungry," the man finally choked out when we made it back to the med bay. I was surprised by a voice. It sounded guttural and forced. "Do not worry. As soon as we have you settled, I'll get you some food." I made do on my promise. As soon as the IV was back in his arm, I told the man I'd be back and headed for Case. After quickly explaining the situation, Case told me to head back to the room and he would follow behind with bowls of stew. I thanked him many times before leaving the kitchen. Sitting alone in the room with the man while we waited for Case felt like torture. Over and over again, he repeated that he was hungry. The same tone and cadence every time, sounding like a broken record. "2 orders of stew coming up," Case said as he entered the room. "Oh, Case, thank you." I shot out of my seat and went to help the man. The man from the ice bolted upright in bed, towering over us even when sitting down. He held out his frostbitten hands greedily and took one of the bowls. Without use of the apron, he upturned the bowl and drank it down in big gulps. The man ate so fast that some of the thick stew broth trailed down either cheek, spilling onto his bare chest. "What were you doing out on the ice?" I finally asked the man. "Hungry, waiting," he responded between gulps. "Why were you waiting out there?" I asked him, eyebrows cocked in curiosity. "Waiting for food," he answered. I furrowed my brow and pondered what that meant. If he had said he was waiting for help, that would have made more sense. Even so, it didn't explain how he had gotten atop the ice, or why he was naked. I thought of drugs, or some sick punishment, but nothing made sense. Looking over at Case, he too wore a look of confusion. The man took the second bowl and drank that one just as greedily. "I've never seen a man eat my food with such vigor," Case said, almost chuckling. "Neither have I," answered back. It was truly a sight to behold. When the man was done, he set the bowl down on the small table and drew his hand across his mouth. Once the mess had been wiped, he licked the back of his hand, not wanting to waste a drop. I felt a small shiver pass through me as I looked at the man's face again. He looked so familiar. It was like a word on the tip of my tongue that kept escaping me. I felt rage start to fill me as I racked my brain. My own memory was intensely frustrating, age and trauma punching holes in it. "Do you have a name?" I asked the man. "Lauren," was all the man said in response. He still licked at the back of his hand like a cat having a bath. "Are you still hungry, Lauren?" Case asked, chuckling. "Hungry," Lauren replied. He sounded like a robot, or like he was speaking while inhaling. "I'll run back to the kitchen and get you some more food." As Case turned on his heel, I sat back down in my chair and reached for my book. As I held it open in my lap, I tried to pretend I was reading. All the while, I was watching Lauren with my peripheral. He had finally stopped licking his hand, but traded it for something else. He had started to chew on his lips numbly, peeling off the dead skin that had grown on his lips before chewing and swallowing. Then he bit down harder. I heard the sickening pop of his teeth through his skin. "Damn it," I said, jumping up from the chair. I hadn't expected him to do something so extreme. I screamed for him to stop, reaching for his arm as he struggled. He tried to keep me away, further biting into the skin around his mouth. He tore his own lips with a sickening sound, blood springing to the surface. I felt my stomach churn as I struggled to get him to stop. That was when Case burst through the door, dropping the stew at his feet. "Hold him while I prepare the sedative," I yelled at Case. I flitted around the room like a butterfly on cocaine, searching for the syringe. Once I had found it, I pierced Lauren's IV and depressed the plunger, injecting the medicine straight into his veins. Pretty soon, the struggling and the biting stopped. I looked down at the horror below me. Lauren's face was smiling, even though he was out cold. Not because he wanted to either. In the short amount of time that had passed, he had managed to tear off both the top and bottom lip, gums and teeth exposed in a haunting and bloody smile. Case started to heave as I pushed him out of the room. I didn't want him puking on the floor, and the best way was to get him out of sight of Lauren. "What the hell was that?" Case screamed, gripping me by my shoulders. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like this before. He just kept saying he was hungry," I cried. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. My lungs lodged in my throat. My hands shook by my sides, not wanting to step back into the room. But I needed to. I needed to keep watch, in case Lauren woke up again. I was utterly terrified, but needed to continue my role as medic. "I'm staying far away from here. That was messed up." Case shook his head as he walked away. I wanted to beg him to stay, but knew that I shouldn't. Case signed up to cook, not to witness a man eat his own face. That was my job, and mine alone. As I write this, the memory of Lauren's face before the harrowing event flashed through my mind once again. This time, it was paired with an image of a wanted poster and a full name. Lauren Anderson, wanted for looting and piracy. He was labeled as one of the greediest bastards to ever sail on Superior's waters. Even though I finally remembered who he was, it did me no good. I still had to treat him just the same. Tonight I will sleep in the room next to the med bay, with one eye open, for I am scared of what is to come if he awakes from his slumber. Hopefully, tomorrow is a better day. L.J. Blackburn. Side note here, guys. If he's a wanted pirate, I'm not gonna lie, he's getting thrown overboard. Like, he's eating his own face, he's a pirate. Throw him overboard. Like, there's no positive to keeping this man on the ship. Anyways, let's continue. Hello all, Evan here again. As we get into our last entry, I implore you to read this passage on an empty stomach, for it's horrific. Although the journal entry is one of the most interesting things I've ever read, it gave me nightmares. I do hope that this tale of the thing that brings the winter, plagued by greed, inspires you to come and visit us. We'll have this journal on full display for you to study at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum. We hope to see you soon. November 10th, 1975, Lake Superior. I was awoken to the sounds of frantic voices and pounding on my door. Richard was screaming my name and wailing his fists against the metal. I shot out of bed and went to answer as Richard snaked himself inside and shut the door behind him. He was standing there, clutching one of his arms, which was bleeding profusely. It looked like his hand was dangling from a thread, wet bone showing through the fat and viscera. "Richard, what happened?" I half screamed. "That thing bit me," he screamed back, clutching his wounded limb to his chest. Without a second thought, I ripped the belt from my pants and affixed it to just below his elbow. Quickly, the blood slowed as it clamped down on the artery, which was a solid flow that turned to a drip here or there. Richard was grateful for my fast thinking. His skin was already starting to turn gray from the blood loss. "What thing?" I asked him. "That monster we pulled from the ice. I know it looks like a man, but it's not a man. Men do not run around on all fours, tearing flesh from the bone with their teeth." Richard's voice hissed out as he groaned from the pain. "What do you mean?" I asked. "What do you mean? I mean what I said. Are you slow?" This time he hissed in annoyance at my question. Truly though, even what I had witnessed the night before, it was hard to believe. "Stay here. I'll check next door and make sure the coast is clear. If it is, follow me into the med bay and I'll patch you up as best I can. If what you say is true, then I need to sedate Lauren as fast as possible." "It has a name, and it's Lauren?" Richard practically spat before laughing maniacally. "You shouldn't bother sedating him. He should be shot on sight." "That's a bit of an extreme," I sighed, giving him a sideways glance. Side note, guys. That's not an extreme. If he's running around on all fours, he's a wanted pirate, and, he's eating people, and he ate his own lips. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with, Richard. Anyways, let's continue. "Not if you've seen what I seen. He didn't bite you. He bit me and others. I'm not so sure they fared as well as I did." Richard was starting to look more gray as the time passed. I figured that I needed to hurry and exited the room, making sure to close the door behind me. Inside of the medical bay, I saw the remnants of the events from the night before. Blood and medical equipment strewn about the room. Lauren was nowhere to be seen, and I was grateful. Grabbing all the sedatives and gauze I could find, I returned to my room and patched Richard's wounds as best as I could for the time being. That was when another scream tore through the air. It echoed and stretched throughout the belly of the ship, the metal network of pathways creating a haunting symphony of pain. I knew it was stupid of me, but I had to do what I could to help. Nothing good would come of me barricading myself inside of the medbay. Nothing good would come from hiding. I needed to steel my resolve and do what I could to help. That was my job after all. When I passed by the kitchen, my heart fell into my stomach. Chunks of skin with curly red hair littered the ground. Fragments of bone crunched underfoot as I unintentionally stepped upon them. I felt bile rise in my throat as I took in the scene before me. The kitchen and mess hall were truly a mess. Blood, skin, organ, and bone were laid upon the floor like a scattering of animal bait. Further into the kitchen, just behind the counter, was Case's torn body. His abdominal cavity had been opened up. Ribs broke through and pointed at odd angles. His skin was torn and jagged, body covered in large bite marks. Had we not been in a boat, miles from any sort of land, I would have thought a bear had come aboard and mauled the jolly cook. His face and most of his scalp was missing. The whites of his eyes and teeth glittered like jewels under the light. I stifled a cry as I pressed 2 fingers to his throat. The man was obviously dead, but a part of me had to check anyway. Time of death, 10:22 a.m. I looked at the watch on my wrist and stepped back from the horrific sight. It took everything within me to not vomit. Even during my tours of Vietnam, this was by far the worst thing I had ever seen. It was like somebody had planted a bomb deep within Case's ribcage before setting it off. Another scream alerted me that there was no time to be standing around. I tore through the kitchen, slipping slightly on a wet piece of flesh. I caught myself on the counter and steadied my feet before trying to leave once more. Using the scream like a bat with echolocation, I made my way to the upper levels of the boat. Before too long, I heard the crack of gunfire tearing through the air. Then 2 more shots popped off before I was thrown into an uncomfortable silence. Sitting upon the stairs to the deck was Captain Thurston. He was bloody and breathing hard, missing half of one leg and a few large chunks from his left arm and shoulder. The captain looked at me with sorrow in his eyes, as if he had done something wrong. Panting as I ran up to him, I reached out a hand that he swatted away. "Do not worry about me, Luther. Take this." Thurston handed me a revolver. Its weight was heavy in my shaking hand. "Sir, I don't understand what's going on," I practically cried. "You have to kill it, and if you can't, you have to sink the ship." The captain gripped my arm tightly with his one good hand. He stared into my eyes with a fierceness I have never known. "Sink the ship?" I questioned. "It can't be allowed to make it back to land," was all he said before passing out. I had no time to tend to his wounds and held an unfamiliar gun in my hand. Using guns wasn't necessarily something I had done frequently, even while in the Navy. At least I knew to pull back the hammer before firing. That much was true. Once again, I steeled my resolve and kept pushing through. Another scream tore through the silence, this one different from the rest. This was not a scream of pain. It was a guttural wail based in insatiable hunger. The man who had eaten his own face was leaving a trail of bodies with bites taken out. That much was clear to me. Based on everything I had seen, my oath to do no harm was thrown out the window. Lauren had to be put down like a rabid dog, and if not, we were going to go down with it. My feet thundered up the metal staircase as I finally made my way onto the deck. Lauren's naked body had transformed into something that only a nightmare could conjure. His pale skin stretched and pulled over bones that were way too large to be contained. His height had grown even more immense, most likely almost reaching 8 feet tall. His bared teeth and lipless face were a grotesque sight. Yellowed eyes stared back at me from across the way as he, or it, turned to face me. As if on instinct, I held the gun and aimed it at his head. Depressing the trigger, a loud bang rang out through the sky. As the shot rang out, Lauren took off like it was the start of a race, tearing across the deck on all fours. I watched as he galloped through the large snowflakes. I felt them melt as they made contact with my bare skin, burning slightly. The shot had missed. As I cocked back the hammer for a second time, Lauren grew even closer. This time, the shot landed, hitting him right between the eyes. Even so, he kept running. "Keep him on the deck, keep him in sight," Richard's voice called out. I couldn't see him, but I could hear him loud and clear. "What are you going to do?" I yelled back, doing what I could to stay out of the monster's path. "I'm going to ram us into those rocks to starboard," Richard said. That was when Lauren changed direction, steering himself away from me. At first, I was grateful to be out of harm's way, until I realized where he was going. Lauren headed to Richard, and there was no way to stop him. Even as I shot him a second and third time, Lauren did not falter. He kept galloping on all fours, looking more animal than human. I didn't make it in time. I wasn't able to stop Lauren. I wasn't able to save Richard. Hell, I wasn't able to save anyone. All I could do was shut the door to the room they were in and lock it. As I finish writing this entry, I shall seal this journal away into my waterproof oilskin. The rocks are coming, and they're coming fast. I'm the last man alive on the SS Lily Marina, and I'll go down with the ship. If by chance this somehow makes it back to land, and if you ever see a naked man out on the ice, do not help them. Lake Superior is insatiable, and I am merely the next to temporarily quell her hunger. L.J. Blackburn. That was a lot to write as the ship's heading towards rocks, about to sink. But I guess good on this guy, L.J. Blackburn, to, put out a warning that somebody might see someday. Anyways, kudos to the author, Reasonable Unit 2170. That was really good. I enjoyed that. I hope you guys did too. The next story today is also from r/NoSleep from user ChanceOwl9650. The last route of Bus 47. For 6 years I drove Route 47. The route wasn't special. It ran from the downtown transit center, through the industrial district, crossed the river, looped through several residential neighborhoods, and ended at a shopping center on the far side of town. It was the kind of route most drivers could practically do in their sleep. Same streets, same traffic lights, same stops every day. The first strange thing happened on a rainy Thursday in November. The weather had been awful all day, and by the time my shift was winding down, visibility had dropped to almost nothing. Most people had already gotten home before the worst of the storm arrived. Around midnight, I was making my final loop before heading back to the depot. Only 3 passengers remained on the bus: a college kid wearing headphones, an older woman carrying several bags of groceries, and a man sitting all the way in the back. I didn't remember seeing the man bored. That wasn't necessarily unusual. Drivers miss things all the time when they're watching traffic, collecting fares, or dealing with passengers. What caught my attention was that he never moved. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, he sat in exactly the same position. His hands rested in his lap. His posture never changed. He wasn't looking out the window or scrolling through a phone. He simply stared straight ahead. The route continued normally until I reached Maple Street. The older woman exited first. Several stops later, the college kid stepped off as well. Suddenly, it was just me and the man in the back. I glanced in the mirror again. He was still there. A few minutes later, I reached the final stop. The shopping center was closed for the night and the parking lot was completely empty. I pulled into the turnaround area and opened the doors. "Last stop," I called. The man didn't react. I repeated myself louder. Still nothing. Finally, annoyed, I set the parking brake and walked down the aisle. When I reached the back of the bus, the seat was empty. I stopped and looked around. The man was gone. The bus had only one exit, and I would have seen anybody leave. Yet there was nobody there. I searched the entire vehicle, every seat, every corner. Nothing. No passenger, no bag. No sign that anyone had been sitting there at all. The next day, I mostly forgot about it. At least I tried to. The following week, it happened again. Same route, same late night shift, same terrible weather. Just after midnight, I checked the mirror and saw the man sitting in the exact same spot. He wore the same dark jacket, the same work boots. He sat with the same expressionless stare. This time, I knew for certain he hadn't boarded. I'd been paying attention at every stop, yet there he was. When I reached the end of the route and walked back to confront him, he vanished exactly as before. By the third appearance, I started asking questions around the depot. Most of the drivers laughed it off. One older driver didn't. The moment I described the man, he became visibly uncomfortable. After a long silence, he asked me a question. "Does he sit on the left side, near the back?" When I nodded, the color drained from his face. He got up and walked away without another word. A few days later, I cornered him in the break room and finally convinced him to explain. 20 years earlier, Route 47 had followed a slightly different path through the industrial district. One night, a driver named Carl was operating the last run when a drunk driver blew through a red light and slammed into the bus. Several passengers were killed instantly. One of the victims had been a factory worker heading home after a double shift. According to the accident report, his body had been found in the rear left section of the bus, the exact seat my mysterious passenger occupied. I wasn't convinced. Every workplace develops ghost stories eventually. Bus depots are no exception. Still, I found myself paying closer attention. The next time the man appeared, I studied him carefully through the mirror. He looked completely ordinary. Middle-aged, short hair, work boots, dark jacket. The only thing unusual was his expression. He looked sad. Not angry, not frightening, just deeply sad. The expression never changed. Weeks passed, and things became more strange. One night, I noticed the man wasn't alone anymore. A woman sat beside him. I had never seen her before. She looked nervous and exhausted. Neither passenger moved for the entire ride. When I reached the final stop and walked toward them, both vanished. Over the following weeks, more passengers began appearing. 3 one night, 4 the next, then 6. They always appeared without boarding and disappeared before I could reach them. By Christmas, nearly half the back of the bus would sometimes be occupied, but nobody ever spoke and no one acknowledged me. They simply sat there. What bothered me most was the look on their faces. Every single one appeared exhausted, defeated, and anxious. They looked like people waiting for bad news they already knew was coming. Eventually, I stopped telling coworkers. Nobody believed me anyway. Then came January 17th. A heavy fog had settled over the city after sunset. By midnight, visibility had dropped so low that even streetlights looked distant and blurry. I was halfway through the route when I checked the mirror and nearly hit the brakes. Every seat in the rear half of the bus was occupied. At least 20 passengers sat silently behind me. The atmosphere inside the bus felt different. The normal rattles and vibrations seemed muted somehow. Everything felt unnaturally quiet. A few blocks later, the stop request bell rang. The sound nearly made me jump out of my seat. For months, these passengers had never interacted with anything. They never moved, they never spoke, yet someone had requested a stop. The illuminated sign above me lit up. Stop requested. I pulled over automatically and opened the doors. Nobody got off. The passengers remained perfectly still. Then the bell rang again, and again, and again. The sound echoed through the bus relentlessly. When I looked into the mirror, every passenger was staring directly at me. For the first time, they weren't looking forward. They were looking at me. A chill ran down my spine. One passenger slowly raised an arm and pointed toward the windshield. I turned my attention back to the road. A city bus sat directly ahead in the middle of an intersection. Its lights were off. Its engine appeared dead. The vehicle blocked the entire road, and I slammed on the brakes. The bus stopped less than 10 feet away. Through the fog, I could tell something was wrong. The paint scheme looked outdated, old, like something from decades ago. Then I saw the route number. 47. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just another bus. It was the old Route 47. The same route involved in the fatal crash 20 years earlier. The vehicle sat motionless in the fog. Every window was dark. Every seat appeared occupied. Standing beside it was a man wearing a transit uniform. As the fog shifted, I recognized him immediately. Carl, the driver who had died in the crash. I recognized him from an employee photograph hanging in the depot. He wasn't looking at his own bus. He was looking directly at mine. Then he slowly shook his head. Just once. Immediately, the stop request bell began ringing nonstop. When I looked into the mirror, every passenger had stood up. Every one of them pointed toward a side street branching off from the intersection. Without thinking, I turned the wheel. The bus lurched down the side road. Seconds later, a tractor-trailer exploded through the intersection at full speed. The driver never touched the brakes. The truck tore through the exact spot where my bus would have been. Had I continued straight, the collision would have been catastrophic. The truck disappeared into the fog. I sat frozen behind the wheel, struggling to breathe. When I finally looked back toward the intersection, the old bus was gone. Carl was gone. The road was completely empty. I checked the mirror. Every passenger had disappeared. The bus was empty. The next morning, police reports confirmed that a truck driver had suffered a medical emergency and lost control of his vehicle near the industrial district around the exact time of the incident. Investigators later stated that anything entering that intersection would almost certainly have been struck. I never told management what happened. Who would have believed me? But something changed after that night. The passengers still appear occasionally. Not often, and never in large numbers anymore. Usually, it's only one or two. The man in the back seat still shows up every few months. He always wears the same jacket and work boots. He always sits in the same seat. But now, whenever I catch sight of him in the mirror, he isn't staring sadly into the distance. He's smiling. And every time I reach the final stop and turn around to look, he's gone. I'm just picturing what it would look like to be looking in the rearview mirror as you're driving a bus and it's dark and you turn around and see a crowd of ghost people in the back seat, wide-eyed, staring straight at you. Yeah, no, that's terrifying. That was really good. Thank you to Chance Owl 9650 for letting me read that story, and let's go ahead and get on with the next one. It's from r/no sleep from user Kronos Cardigan. I sell cursed items to the devil. Stop me if you've heard this before. I got this game cartridge from a garage sale, and there's this cursed game character in it. Realistic eyes, realistic screams, realistic blood. Yep, hear that all the time. Scared children are my usual clientele. Possession of objects and locations happen when a ghost wants to stay on Earth. The soul cannot live by itself, it needs a host. And since the body is dead, they have to attach themselves to an object. The most popular possessed objects, are dolls, mirrors, and houses, but any object can be possessed by a ghost. Game cartridges, DVDs, lamps, laptops, Barbie dolls, you name it, someone's in it. A common misconception is that all haunted objects are violent, that they want to scare you, take your soul, eat you alive, or whatever. That's mostly dependent on the person. 9 times out of 10, the object is possessed by a scared old lady who wants someone to talk to, or maybe a child who died from tuberculosis or something. I have a cat clock that loves to play bridge. I keep the more aggressive objects at the back of my shop, under lock and key. People buy stuff sometimes, mostly daredevils and YouTubers. Sometimes people want to buy their personal bloodthirsty ghost, but I urge against it. If they buy it anyway, I give them a small prayer and let them be. Not my fault if they die. They signed a verbal contract not to sue me. I must be boring you. There's nothing much that happens in a haunted thrift shop. Let's talk about my regular customer, the devil. Or a devil. They never explained. One night in the middle of summer, I was sitting at my counter, the last hour before I closed, when a bald woman shambled in. She was basically bones, her eyes and cheeks sunken so deep I could count her teeth through her skin. I welcomed her. She didn't reply. She just slowly limped through the store, looking at all the front store items. An hour passed, and it was time to close up shop. It was quiet, like nobody was ever there. I remembered that there was a woman in the store, and I looked around for her. When I found her at the tech section, she was talking, whispering to a young man. Skinny, tall, brunette, nondescript. I don't remember another person being in here, so I came up to her. Hey, store's closing. They both turned to me, and when I blinked, they disappeared. The only sound, the shattering of a tube TV. I rushed to the camera footage behind the counter, and they're simply gone. No glitch, no buffer, not even a swing of a door. With nothing left to do, I closed up shop and locked the doors. The next morning, I brought the TV to the back shed. I checked if it's still possessed. I used the EMF reader. I used a Ouija board. I used that radio thing. Nothing. Empty, curious. I went through the book of dead people. All the profiles of who is in what object. I checked for Tube TV number 2 and I found the guy she was talking to. A crackhead who died on his couch. Skinny, tall, brunette. I had a slight idea of what was going on, but I couldn't confirm it. A year later, she came back. Same skull, same teeth, same time. I had a photo of her from the video camera and put her up on the list of watch out for clients. I followed her through the store as she was looking at clocks, rocks, everything. Curious, she said. Any reason to be? No need to hide anything from you. You won't understand. At that point, she called a name, and an old woman appeared behind me. She walked through me, slow with curiosity. Her head was caved in at the back, a dry cavern of red flesh and bits of skull. The lady whispered, some mutterings I couldn't understand, and the old lady listened intently, nodding her head. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. "Follow me," the lady said to the old woman. The woman looked at me, then back at her. She nodded, and they shook hands. In a blink, they vanished. The Santa cookie jar shattered. I checked. Old lady with a shotgun. This dance continued on. The lady comes in yearly, makes a deal with a soul, and leaves. I followed her, talked with her. She won't tell me her name, what she's doing. She just does her thing and leaves. One year I got tired of losing merchandise, so I told her, if you're going to break it, you're going to pay for it. The next year, she dropped 2 gold coins. I got them appraised. They were drachmas. They cost $1,000 per piece. While it was nice, I'm a fair lady. Next time she came, I told her just to give me cash. It would be easier that way. And she did. At the right price, too. $50 for a wristwatch. We had a good long relationship after that. She does her thing, I get paid. She gets good items too, expensive ones. She's basically my #1 regular. This year, I asked her a question. When I die and possess something, will you finally tell me what you're doing with those souls? She chuckled and answered, when you die, I will take you. I accepted that offer. I shook her hand and she went to do her business. This message is to my niece, who will inherit my store. When I die, I will possess Grandma's vase, the jade one with the golden dragons on it. You will put me on the counter and reserve it for her. Don't give me to anyone else. You will know her when you see her. Bald, white, so skinny you can count her teeth. You don't need to stay for it. You can even leave the counter. Tell her I cost $50,000. She'll pay. Alright, this OP just straight up was like, yeah, sure, I'll sell my soul to you. Fine, that's cool. Come on. Like, I don't know about you guys, but if it were me, I'm asking some more questions. Anyways, thanks to Kronos Cardigan for letting me read that story. Also, huge shout out to my channel members. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you guys do want to further support the channel, that link is in the description. However, it is not at all required, completely optional. Don't forget to join the Discord if you haven't already. That link's going to be in the description as well. And that's all the scary Reddit stories in Minecraft I have for you today. As always, I will see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching,